So in almost every elite military unit in the world, the core unit is 4 people. And there's a reason for that. Some there's 5. 80% of the pop bands in the world top pop bands have got 3 or 4 people in them. There's some with 5. And any biological statement is like that. There'll be some outliers. But for the vast majority of the time, 4 is the stable number. And you only really get those damaging egotistical battles when the number gets to 6 and beyond. There's a good reason for it. There's lots of reasons for it. There are perceptual reasons. There are memory reasons. Next time you go to the shop for 5 things, I guarantee you'll forget one. Our working memory capacity is about 4 objects. And our ability to take in other events, other people, is limited to about 4 people. So what I think about what you said about what she did to him, I can cope with that. But what I think about what you said about what she did to him because of her, then it starts getting Shakespearean. And there's a limit on our conversational capacities. And one little parlor game you can play, or anybody can play, next time you're in a group situation, is just look at, and I do this with corporate groups when I go meet them, I'll arrive early and film them and then show them the film to themselves. And you'll see conversational groups of 6, 7, 5. And within a minute, and often much more quickly than a minute, it'll split up into a 3 and a 4, or a 4 and a 2, or a 3 and a 2, because we just haven't got that capacity to take that 5th person into account. And so that's one reason, the memory reason. The other reason is what I call social capital. I should publish this before you show it to your thousands of followers. If I'm in a conversational group of 4 people, I can talk to person A, I can talk to person B, I can talk to person C. If you can talk to person A, you can talk to person B, and you can talk to me. So I'm in 3 2-person conversations, but I'm out of 3 2-person conversations. But that's okay, because for me to badmouth you, or you to badmouth me, or me to worry about you, it would demand something very bold, because it's a high capital risk of getting something wrong in a 4-person group. If you're in a 6-person group, now I can talk to each one of the other 5, but they can each talk to each other in groups of 2. So I'm now in 5 2-person conversations, and I'm out of 10 2-person conversations. So now I can think, and I'd have reason to think, what's Ross saying about me in those other 10 conversations, And you'd have reason to think, what's Vince saying about me in those 2-person conversations? So it's not hard to see why groups would fracture. And there's lots and lots of evidence for it. The best, as usual, comes from the military. I did ask somebody from an elite military unit once, why do you have 4 people in a group? Which has existed since Roman times, by the way. And he said, because if you've got 5 people in a group, you increase the chances of somebody coming back in a body bag, which kind of puts, scientific measures of milliseconds here and there.
Really?
Yeah.
So they said that. So is that just from their experience when we're in groups of 5, the chances of losing someone is higher?
Yeah. And
if they don't know why?
Yes, and because you lose the control and cohesion, because it's harder to think what he did about what he did about he did. I've now got just 1 over my capacity. If you look at even sales figures, once you get more than 5 people in a sales team, adding a 6th or a 7th actually doesn't add value. They don't pro rata produce as much. But wherever you look, there's lots of evidence. And this has been just beautifully articulated by Robin Dunbar in his book, Grooming Gossip and the Evolution of Language, one of my top 10 pop science reads. And then there are other places where you can find it. Haydn invented the string quartet and wrote 83 of them, but not a single string quintet. And even if you're into classical music, you can only think of a handful, if that, of quintets. And it's always an instrument visiting the quartet. Whereas with quartets, they last for decades and stick together. So there's a very good reason for any organisation or group of people on a project to not have a group of people larger than 4.
Yeah. And that was something I remember when we first spoke about this. I actually think it was the first time I met you. I was waiting for a lift and we ended up speaking for about 45 minutes to an hour about teams of four and how that affects team dynamics. You mentioned something about a team of rowers where
it's a classical experiment in psychology, the Ringelmann effect. You put people on an erg machine, they're going to row as a team, or it's been a tug of war as well, and just measure how much power people generate or how much they pull. And up to about 4 people, you get a reasonable amount of power from everybody. But when the 5th person is added, without anybody saying anything or even realizing it, the average power really, really sinks.
So it's a subconscious, almost. There's more people involved. My maximum involvement is less valuable.
Yeah, I think it's mostly subconscious, but there's always an asshole out there who's going to weigh up the odds. Yeah. This context of conversational groups, how do you get group cohesion? I'll give you one example of a team I work with where 70% of the team were all from one source and 30% of the team were from another. And all that happened is that the 70% hung out with their friends. So the 30% didn't really gel with the rest of the team. You had a schism. And I went to the training ground. They had this kind of big wedding reception style tables in the restaurant, which meant that, I'd be talking to somebody there and not the person there. The table was too big to talk to the person across the other side of the table. And it breaks that rule of a conversational rule of 4. What I got them to do was to set up the restaurant in tables of 4. And because, as I said earlier, there's high social capital, you can't opt out of a conversation of 4 people. And it was the noisiest dinner they'd ever had.
Yeah.
Because you can't opt out. You can't sit there, as we've all done in business meals and wedding receptions. We all sat there thinking, well, they're talking that way, they're talking that way, I'll go on my phone. Yeah. It's much, much harder to do in a group of 4.
And that translates, I assume, if you're setting up a project for a team and they're thinking, okay, let's go for a team of 6, would it be better to split the tasks up into 2 3s?
Very on doled out. Yeah, unless it was 6 people to carry a massive sheet of glass. Yeah. But for any long-term projects, groups of 3 and 4 are simply much more stable, going back to Robin Dunbar, conversationally and operationally.
Well, when we had a meal the other day as well, it was a really interesting example where you said, look at the table to the right, there's 10 people on that table. You will rarely see a conversation of 5 people, I think. There'll be 4s. Yeah. But if there is a 5, it won't last long. And we watched for a little bit. That's exactly one person went off on their phone.
Yeah.
Or you did say there's one caveat, if there's someone of high status, they can maintain. Yeah.
So you'll often see at business meetings, where people are trying to make contact, you might see one person of very high status speaking and the other 4, 5 or 6 people listening. But that's not a conversation, and that wouldn't be a sustainable group. When it's a group of peers or people who you want to sustain over time, then I would put 4 as that limit.
And you said you've already mentioned, but you're very much into your music as well, and that groups of larger than 4 usually become someone and or the likelihood of breaking up is high.
It's true, 90% more of the time. Fleetwood Mac described, I can't remember which one of them said it, but there were 5 people in the band, and somebody said everybody in the group got on with 3 of the other people. I had two students recently do wonderful piece of work. One was to look at 1,000 years of art, take 25 paintings from each century, and what she did was look at the proximity groups, how many people you get in bunches, and then look at the conversational groups, how many people you get facing each other or obviously in a conversation. And it doesn't matter, as in lots of art 1,000 years ago, whether Jesus is there or not. The groupings of conversational groups follows exactly the same distribution of the groupings of conversational groups in real life. The other student, so it's historically, it's not a modern phenomenon. And people say, well, given that we might be cleverer now, we're not, or there are more distractions now, I'm not sure there are, or that society is different, I'm not sure it is. Wouldn't it be different now? But so it's important to know, no, it isn't different now. It was always like that. Other students do analysis of 40 Asian movies and 40 Western movies, look at the conversational groupings, and also in sitcoms.
We spoke about Friends, didn't we?
Yeah. Again, the distribution is there. And the beautiful thing about this is the artists didn't know they were doing it. They were doing this, obeying this social rule before they knew about perspective, before they knew about the rules of colour. Yeah. But they were getting the rules of social psychology, the rules of people, exactly right. That's how fundamental it is.
So that's one thing that's super applicable to someone listening who would go, all right, I've got a project.
Absolutely fundamental to how we put people in learning groups, how we put people on project groups, how we get people to invest in each other. And you can be a member of different groups of four and bring them together. You know, obviously bigger groups have to come together at some stage, but they have to be stable too.
It is funny how it does exist everywhere. It's not limited to performance or this or that. It's genuinely is quite consistent.
It's a fundamental of human behaviour and organisation, and always has been. Yeah. All the evidence is that from the very beginning of human societies, we've lived according to these rules.